Hey guys, tonight we're slipping beneath the heavy wool blankets of Victorian London, where the air tastes like coal smoke and the darkness never feels quite complete. You're about to discover a world where sleeping through the night was considered unusual, where strangers might share your mattress, and where the simple act of going to bed involved rituals so strange they'd seem like fever dreams to us now. The story may solve mysteries you never had an explanation for, like why your great-great-grandmother's house had such oddly small bedrooms, or why old novels are obsessed with characters waking at midnight for mysterious activities. So, before you explore the story with me, please take a moment to help me subscribe to the channel, like and share this video, or maybe leave a comment below. But make sure you do it when you really like what I bring to you. Tell me where you're watching from tonight, or what your own strangest sleep habit might be. I'd love to know if you're tucked in somewhere cozy or listening while you pretend to work. Now, let's keep the lights as soft as possible. Turn on the fan for a gentle sound to help the story feel more emotional, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. You step into a London bedroom in 1875, and the first thing that strikes you isn't what you see, it's what you smell. The air hangs thick with coal smoke seeping through every crack in the window frame, mixing with the sweet sour smell of whale oil burning in the lamp on your bedside table. Your eyes water slightly, but you're used to this. Everyone's used to this. The fog outside isn't just weather, it's a living thing, a yellow-brown soup that presses against the glass like it wants to come inside and sleep beside you. Your bedroom is smaller than you expected, barely large enough for the iron bedstead that dominates the space. The wallpaper, a pattern of roses that looked cheerful in daylight, now seems to writhe in the flickering lamplight, creating shadows that dance across the ceiling like restless spirits. You're not afraid of these shadows. Fear is a luxury reserved for people who have the energy for it, and you've been awake since 4 this morning, working in conditions that would horrify modern labour inspectors. The gaslight from the street lamp outside casts orange stripes across your bed through the gap in the curtains. You should close them completely, but that would make the room even stuffier than it already is, and you're trying to decide which discomfort you can tolerate more, the intrusive light or the suffocating air. This is the eternal London bedroom dilemma, one that every resident negotiates each night with varying degrees of success. You begin the elaborate process of preparing for bed, which involves significantly more steps than you'd prefer. First, you must tend to the fire in the small grate. Not extinguish it completely, because the room will become unbearably cold by 3 in the morning, but bank it carefully so it provides just enough warmth without filling the room with additional smoke. This is a delicate art, one that takes months to master, and that you still get wrong approximately half the time. The bed itself is a monument to Victorian ingenuity and discomfort. The mattress is stuffed with horsehair, which seemed like a reasonable choice when you purchased it 3 years ago, but has since developed mysterious lumps that migrate to whichever position you're trying to sleep in. Historians still argue whether Victorian mattresses were deliberately uncomfortable to discourage sinful idleness, or whether people genuinely believed that sleeping on what essentially amounted to a bag of rope would somehow improve their moral character. You pile on the blankets, 3 heavy wool ones that smell faintly of mothballs and the particular mustiness that all Victorian textiles seem to acquire within months of purchase. The sheets are linen, scratchy against your skin, and they'll stay on this bed for another week before washing day comes around again. The idea of changing sheets more frequently than once a fortnight would strike your neighbours as wasteful and possibly suspect. What are you trying to hide with all that cleanliness? As you finally climb into bed, you're acutely aware of the sounds of London around you. The city never truly sleeps, even in these pre-electric hours. You hear the call of the night soil men making their rounds, the clatter of a late hansom cab on the cobblestones, the distant argument of drunks spilling out of a public house 3 streets over. These sounds are so familiar they are almost comforting. A lullaby of urban chaos that tells you the world is still turning, still functioning, still survivable. But here's what would surprise a time traveller from the 21st century. You're not actually planning to sleep through until morning. That concept, 8 uninterrupted hours of unconsciousness, would seem bizarre to you, almost pathological. Instead, you're settling in for what you call first sleep, a few hours of rest that will carry you until around midnight or 1 in the morning, at which point you'll wake naturally and spend an hour or 2 in quiet activity before returning for second sleep until dawn. This segmented sleep pattern isn't a disorder or a sign of insomnia. It's completely normal, expected, and built into the social fabric of Victorian life. During that middle-of-the-night wakeful period, you might read by candlelight, pray, visit the chamber pot, or engage in intimate relations with a spouse. Some people use the time to reflect on their dreams from first sleep, which are considered particularly vivid and meaningful. Others simply lie in the darkness, thinking private thoughts that the busy daylight hours don't permit. The medical establishment of your era has opinions about all of this naturally. Dr. Phineas Quimby's popular sleep manual, which sits on your shelf gathering dust, insists that proper sleep requires the head to be elevated exactly 7 inches, the room to be maintained at precisely 62 degrees Fahrenheit, and the sleeper to lie on their right side to facilitate proper digestion. You've tried following these instructions exactly once and spent the entire night uncomfortable and irritable, so now the book serves mainly as something to balance your wash basin on. Your lamp still burns, because extinguishing it completely means fumbling in absolute darkness if you need to wake. And absolute darkness in a Victorian bedroom is more absolute than modern people can easily imagine. There are no electronic displays casting a faint glow, no streetlights bright enough to penetrate heavy curtains, no ambient light from neighbouring buildings. When the lamp goes out, you're plunged into a darkness so complete that you literally cannot see your hand in front of your face. Some people find this comforting. You're not one of those people. As your eyes grow heavy, you're aware of the particular quality of Victorian tiredness, a bone-deep exhaustion mixed with a vague anxiety about what tomorrow will demand. Sleep is not just rest. It's a temporary reprieve from the relentless grind of industrial life, from the choking air, from the constant noise, from the pressure to be productive every waking moment. And yet, even in sleep, you can't fully escape. The smoke follows you into your dreams, and you'll wake multiple times throughout the night, each time requiring a moment to remember where you are, what year it is, and why everything smells faintly of burning coal. You wake suddenly around midnight, and there's nothing alarming about this. Your body has completed its first cycle of sleep, and now you're entering what your grandmother called the watching hours, that peculiar stretch of darkness when the world belongs to those who've opened their eyes, while everyone else presumably slumbers on. Except they don't, do they? If you listen carefully, you can hear Mrs. Henderson next door moving about in her kitchen, the soft clink of a teacup against a saucer. 2 houses down, someone is playing a piano very quietly, the notes drifting through the London night like smoke. This is segmented sleep, and before the Industrial Revolution turned human beings into machine parts that needed to run on factory time, this is how nearly everyone in the Western world experienced rest. You would go to sleep shortly after darkness fell, around 8 or 9 in the evening, wake naturally around midnight for 1 or 2 hours, then return to sleep until dawn. The time between these two sleeps had its own special quality, a liminal space that belonged neither to day nor night, work nor rest. During this wakeful interlude, you light a single candle. Wasting lamp oil would be foolish, and the tiny flame creates a bubble of warm light in the vast darkness of your room. You're not drowsy anymore. Your mind is clear, almost preternaturally alert, as if this midnight consciousness taps into something deeper than your daytime awareness. People report that their thoughts during this period have a different character, more philosophical, more creative, less concerned with the mundane anxieties that plague the daylight hours. You pick up the small volume of poetry from your bedside table, squinting at the words in the candlelight. Reading between sleeps is a common practice, though the medical establishment has conflicting opinions about it. Some doctors insist that stimulating the mind during this period will prevent the return to sleep. Others argue that gentle mental activity is exactly what's needed to ease the transition back into slumber. Historians still argue whether this segmented sleep pattern was biologically natural or simply a cultural adaptation to the realities of pre-industrial life, where artificial light was expensive and dangerous, making extended evening activities impractical. Your neighbour Thomas, whom you occasionally encounter in the shared privy at the back of the building during those midnight hours, uses his waking time for prayer. He's quite serious about it, following a regimen of contemplative meditation that apparently dates back to medieval monasteries, where monks would rise for matins, midnight prayers, as a matter of religious discipline. What the monks formalized into liturgy was actually just an acknowledgement of what human bodies naturally wanted to do anyway. The idea of sleeping in one continuous 8-hour block is still relatively new, a product of the industrial cities that demand workers arrive at factories at precise times and remain alert for continuous shifts. The old agricultural rhythms, where work followed the sun and sleep followed darkness, permitted this more fluid approach to rest. But now, with gaslighting extending the evening hours and factory whistles dictating the start of each day, people are being trained to compress their sleep into a single, unbroken session. You can feel this shift happening around you, like a tide going out. Your younger colleagues at the shop sometimes boast about sleeping through the entire night, as if this is an achievement rather than simply a different pattern. They drink coffee in the evening, that exotic, expensive stuff that's becoming fashionable, specifically to stay awake longer, to wring a few more productive hours from the day. Then they complain about feeling exhausted, about needing laudanum to fall asleep, about waking, feeling unrested. During your wakeful hour, you also attend to bodily needs that Victorian propriety forbids discussing in polite company, but that nonetheless demand attention. The chamber pot lurks beneath the bed, and you use it now, grateful that you don't need to venture down the dark hallway to the shared privy. In winter, that walk would mean exposure to temperatures that would shock you fully awake and make returning to sleep nearly impossible. The chamber pot is a compromise between comfort and dignity, one that every household navigates with varying degrees of success. You think about your parents, who lived in the countryside before the railways changed everything. They would describe the night completely differently than you experience it here in London. Their darkness was darker. No gas lamps, no neighbours burning lights, just the occasional candle and the moon when it chose to appear. But their night was also quieter, less interrupted by urban noises, and their segmented sleep felt more natural, less like a battle against the demands of modern life. The literature of your time is full of references to this pattern, though future readers will scratch their heads, wondering what people were doing awake at such odd hours. Chaucer wrote about first sleep and second sleep centuries ago. Shakespeare's characters frequently discuss activities undertaken after their initial sleep period. Legal depositions from the era casually mention people being awake at 1 or 2 in the morning without treating this as unusual or requiring explanation. But you sense this knowledge is already fading from collective memory. Your own children, when you tuck them into bed, sometimes resist sleeping in the old way. They've heard at school about the importance of consolidated rest, a term that sounds scientific and modern and therefore superior to the way humans have been sleeping since time immemorial. Progress apparently means fighting against your body's natural rhythms until they break and reshape into something more convenient for factory owners. You finish your tea. Yes, you've made tea during your wakeful period, because why wouldn't you? And feel the pleasant drowsiness returning. This is the signal that second sleep is approaching, and you welcome it. The candle has burned down another inch, and you pinch it out carefully between moistened fingers, plunging the room back into that profound Victorian darkness. As you settle back into the lumpy horsehair mattress, pulling the scratchy wool blankets up to your chin, you reflect on how different this experience is from what your grandchildren will probably know. They'll live in a world of electric lights and alarm clocks, where sleep is something you do all at once, on a schedule determined by forces outside your control. They'll probably think your way of sleeping is strange, inefficient, maybe even unhealthy. But right now, in this quiet hour between your 2 sleeps, you've experienced something that factory time is slowly erasing. A natural rhythm of rest and wakefulness, a space for reflection and quiet activity that belongs to no employer, serves no productive purpose, and exists simply because human bodies, when left to their own devices, prefer to rest in waves rather than blocks. You've touched something ancient and nearly extinct, though you don't know it yet. The fog presses against your window like a living thing, and somewhere in the distance you hear the night watchman calling the hour. 2 o'clock and all's well. You drift back towards sleep, knowing you'll wake again around 5 or 6, and that the whole exhausting cycle of Victorian existence will begin again. But for now, you're suspended between consciousness and dreams, between the old ways and the new, between the natural world and the industrial machine that's slowly devouring it. Do you remember that feeling of waking at midnight and feeling perfectly, strangely alert? That's not insomnia. That's your body remembering how humans slept for thousands of years before someone decided continuous unconsciousness was more efficient. You wake properly as dawn begins its slow grey arrival, and the first thing you notice is the warmth pressed against your back. This isn't your spouse, it's young Margaret, the housemate who shares your bed 3 nights per week as part of her employment arrangement. On the other nights, she sleeps in the kitchen near the stove, curled up on a pile of blankets that serve as her official quarters. This arrangement strikes neither of you as particularly strange, though it would scandalise people a century in the future who've forgotten that privacy is a luxury most Victorians simply cannot afford. The bed you're lying in measures approximately 4 feet wide, which seems generous until you remember that it sometimes accommodates 3 people. When your sister visits from Birmingham, she squeezes in on the other side, and the 3 of you arrange yourselves like sardines in a tin, trying to claim enough space to breathe without stealing blankets from your neighbours. You've developed the skill of sleeping without moving much, because any significant shift in position creates a domino effect that wakes everyone else. Margaret stirs now. her elbow digging briefly into your ribs before she realizes she's awake and scoots towards her edge of the mattress. There's a careful etiquette to shared sleeping that everyone understands but nobody discusses. You pretend not to notice each other's morning breath, snoring, or the various sounds and smells that human bodies produce during the night. This studied obliviousness is what makes the arrangement bearable, transforming what could be mortifyingly intimate into something merely practical. In the lodging houses down by the docks, the sleeping arrangements make your situation look positively spacious. You've heard stories, everyone has, about the four-penny coffins, narrow wooden boxes where men sleep upright, their arms draped over a rope strung across the space to keep them from falling forward. Even stranger are the two-penny hangs, where dozens of men pay for the privilege of draping themselves over a communal rope stretched across a room, sleeping standing up like horses, their bodies swaying gently through the night. Your cousin Albert stayed in one of these places when he first arrived in London from the countryside, and he described it with a mixture of horror and dark humour. "Imagine," he said, 50 men hanging on a rope like laundry, all of us too tired to care about dignity, just wanting a few hours of unconsciousness before the next day of labour. At 5 a.m, the ropekeeper would cut the rope and everyone would collapse to the floor, jolted into wakefulness by the fall. It was cheaper than a proper bed and more reliable than sleeping in the street, which made it a reasonable choice by the standards of Victorian poverty. The reality of London housing means that beds are valuable real estate, rented and shared in ways that would seem extraordinary to people with more space and money. Factory workers on different shifts share the same bed. One person sleeps while the other works, and they swap when the shifts change. Historians still argue whether this hot bedding practice was as widespread as contemporary accounts suggest, or whether Victorian social reformers exaggerated the problem to support their arguments for housing reform. Margaret swings her legs out of bed and immediately begins her morning routine, which involves getting dressed beneath her nightgown with the modesty of a professional contortionist. You politely face the wall during this process, granting her the illusion of privacy in a room where genuine privacy is architecturally impossible. Within minutes, she's transformed from rumpled sleeping companion to proper uniformed housemaid, and she disappears downstairs to begin lighting fires and preparing breakfast. You remain in bed a few minutes longer, savouring the warmth of the blankets before the day's demands pull you into the cold air. The room is freezing now. The fire you banked last night has gone out completely, and your breath creates small clouds in the morning air. This is normal. This is expected. The idea of heating a bedroom to comfortable temperatures would strike most Victorians as an absurd waste of coal, suitable only for invalids or the very elderly. In wealthier households, the kind you sometimes visit when making deliveries, the sleeping arrangements are different but no less peculiar by modern standards. Children share beds until they're practically grown, not because their parents can't afford more beds, but because warmth and companionship are considered more important than individual sleeping space. Even in houses with multiple bedrooms, it's common for sisters to share a bed well into their 20s, or for adult children visiting from their own homes to automatically assume they'll be paired up with a sibling for the night. The truly wealthy have their own oddities. You've heard that in some grand houses, husbands and wives maintain separate bedrooms entirely, meeting for marital intimacy by appointment, as it were, before retreating to their individual sleeping quarters. This strikes you as simultaneously luxurious and lonely. Imagine having so much space that you choose to sleep alone, night after night, in rooms large enough to hold your entire family. But it's the lodging houses that really showcase the extremes of Victorian sleeping arrangements. Some of them pack 20 or 30 people into rooms designed for 5, with mattresses covering every inch of floor space, boarders sleeping in shifts around the clock. The air in these places must be unimaginable. Dozens of bodies breathing, sweating, coughing, and producing all the effluvia that humans generate, with windows kept firmly shut against the supposed dangers of night air. You've also heard whispered stories about the fourpenny laydowns, where men and women share sleeping spaces with alarming informality, though whether these stories are true or just moral panic spread by social reformers is difficult to determine. Victorian propriety demands that everyone acts scandalised by such arrangements, but Victorian poverty doesn't particularly care about propriety. When you're exhausted and cold and desperate for a few hours of horizontal rest, you'll share space with whoever else can afford the same fourpence. There's a peculiar intimacy to shared sleeping that nobody quite knows how to discuss. You know things about Margaret's sleep habits that you'd never learn in any other context. That she grinds her teeth when anxious about the week's accounts, that she sometimes cries quietly in her sleep on Sundays after receiving letters from home, that she snores very gently, but only when lying on her back. These small vulnerabilities create a bond that exists alongside but separate from your daytime relationship as employer and employee. The boarding house across the street operates on a different principle entirely. They rent beds by the 8-hour shift, cycling 3 different tenants through the same mattress every day. The landlady strips and rotates the sheets with mechanical efficiency, and the bed itself probably provides more consistent income than any job its occupants could hope to find. This is London housing in the Victorian age. Every square foot monetised, every horizontal surface potentially converted into sleeping space for someone desperate enough to pay for it. As you finally leave the warmth of your bed and begin your own morning routine, you're aware that the sleeping arrangements you consider normal would seem dystopian to people with more space and more options. But this is simply how things are done when housing is scarce. Wages are low, and privacy is a luxury reserved for the wealthy. You share your bed with Margaret not because you particularly want to, but because her wages barely cover her most basic needs, and providing her sleeping space is part of your obligation as her employer. The morning light filtering through fog and coal smoke turns everything a sickly yellow-grey. You can hear the rest of the house waking up. Boots on stairs, doors opening and closing, the general shuffle of people preparing for another day. And somewhere in the building, other people are just now going to sleep, having worked through the night ready to claim whatever bed space has opened up now that day workers have vacated it. You're getting dressed when the familiar morning headache announces itself, a dull throb behind your eyes that you've learned to accept as part of waking life. Downstairs in the kitchen, you know exactly what will help. Your medicine bottle sits on the shelf next to the tea caddy, its brown glass reflecting the lamplight with a promise of relief. The label reads, Mrs. Winslow's Soothing Syrup, though you use it for your own ailments rather than for the teething babies it's supposedly designed to calm. The fact that it contains morphine is mentioned nowhere on the label, but everyone knows the secret ingredient that makes it work so effectively. Victorian bedtime is, in many ways, a carefully orchestrated chemical experience. You reach for your bottle of Mitchell's Cordial for the headache, a preparation that tastes vaguely of cherry and definitely of laudanum. That miraculous tincture of opium dissolved in alcohol that has become as common in London households as salt or sugar. Your doctor prescribed it months ago for nervous exhaustion, which is what Victorian physicians call the crushing anxiety of trying to survive in an industrial city on insufficient wages while breathing toxic air. The medicine cabinet in an average Victorian home would horrify a modern pharmacist. Alongside the laudanum, you have Godfrey's cordial for digestive complaints, Kendal Black Drop for those nights when sleep absolutely will not come, and several unnamed preparations purchased from the chemist's shop that promise relief from everything from melancholy to menstrual cramps. What they all have in common is opium, morphine or cocaine administered in doses that would be considered criminal in future centuries, but are currently as legal and commonplace as aspirin. Before bed each night, thousands of Londoners engage in the same ritual you do. A careful spoonful of laudanum, perhaps mixed with a tot of gin for good measure, to ease the transition from consciousness to sleep. The advertisements in the penny papers promise that these medicines will grant peaceful repose, sweet dreams, and refreshing slumber, and they're not entirely wrong. What they don't mention is the dependency that builds slowly, imperceptibly, until you realise you can no longer sleep without your nightly dose. Margaret returns from the kitchen with your morning tea, and you notice she's moving slowly, her eyes slightly unfocused. She takes her own medicine, of course. All the servants do. How else could they manage the 18-hour work days, the constant physical labour, the emotional strain of living in someone else's house and following someone else's rules? Her bottle is cheaper than yours, purchased from a street vendor rather than a proper chemist, but the active ingredient is the same: opium in various forms and concentrations. The working classes have their own relationship with these substances. Factory workers take Stickney and Poor's paregoric to dull the pain of industrial accidents and the chronic ailments that come from breathing cotton fibres or coal dust 12 hours a day. Dockers swallow Dover's powder to keep working through injuries that would otherwise be incapacitating. Sex workers rely on laudanum to make their nights bearable, dosing themselves into a pleasant haze that transforms horror into something merely tolerable. Children are perhaps the most saturated with opiates, though their doses come disguised as teething remedies and cough syrups. Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup is particularly popular among working mothers who need their infants to sleep quietly while they labour in factories or take in piecework. The babies do indeed sleep, deeply, sometimes permanently, though the manufacturers insist that any fatalities are due to improper administration, rather than the morphine content that would sedate a grown adult. Historians still argue whether Victorian Britain had an opiate crisis comparable to modern drug epidemics, or whether the widespread use of these substances was simply a rational response to lives that were objectively difficult to endure without chemical assistance. The line between medicine and recreation was blurry at best. You take laudanum for your headache, for your anxiety, for your difficulty sleeping, and also because it makes the gaslit evening hours feel softer and more manageable. Your friend Charlotte has developed what everyone politely calls a dependency on her nerve tonic, which is really just morphine in a slightly different formulation. She takes it throughout the day now, not just at bedtime, and her hands shake visibly when she's gone more than a few hours without a dose. But what's she supposed to do? Stop taking the medicine her doctor prescribed and simply endure the crushing weight of Victorian womanhood sober? The very idea seems cruel. The patent medicine industry has grown rich from this collective need for chemical comfort. Every newspaper carries advertisements for miracle cures, each one promising to solve the fundamental problem of Victorian existence, that it's exhausting, painful, and often unbearable. Ayer's cherry pectoral for coughs, Hamlin's wizard oil for pain, Hostetter's celebrated stomach bitters for digestion. all of them containing generous amounts of alcohol, opium, or cocaine, sometimes all three. At night, after you've taken your medicine and climbed into bed, the world softens around the edges in a way that's genuinely pleasant. The lumpy mattress feels more forgiving, the scratchy sheets less irritating, the sounds of London less intrusive. Your thoughts drift rather than race, and sleep comes more easily, though whether it's truly restful is a question you've learned not to ask. You wake feeling heavy and slightly confused, needing morning tea to clear the fog, and then the cycle begins again. Some people have started questioning this system. There are temperance advocates who rail against laudanum with the same fervour they apply to alcohol, insisting that opiate use is degrading the moral fibre of the nation. Medical journals occasionally publish articles suggesting that perhaps administering morphine to infants might not be entirely safe. But these voices are drowned out by the sheer practical need for something, anything, to make difficult lives more bearable. You've tried sleeping without your medicine, and it's possible, technically, but the sleep that comes is fitful and unsatisfying. You wake frequently, your mind racing with anxieties that the laudanum usually suppresses. The morning headaches are worse, your nerves feel raw and exposed. After 3 nights of this misery, you return to your nightly dose with relief and a vague sense of defeat. The chemistry of Victorian sleep extends beyond the medicine bottles. Alcohol is involved too, of course. A glass of port or sherry before bed is considered healthful, even medicinal. Some people swear by warm milk with brandy, others by hot gin with honey. The working classes have their own versions: beer warmed by the fire, cheap whiskey cut with sugar water, whatever's affordable and effective at inducing the stupor they need to face tomorrow. In the wealthier homes you sometimes visit, they're experimenting with newer substances. Chloral hydrate has become fashionable among the upper classes, marketed as a more refined alternative to opium. It works beautifully for inducing sleep, though it's also quite effective at inducing death when the dose is miscalculated. Cocaine preparations are sold as pick-me-ups for the morning after a laudanum-heavy night, creating a chemical seesaw that keeps the user perpetually medicated in one direction or another. The irony, which you sometimes perceive dimly through your medicine-hazed thoughts, is that much of the sleep difficulty these substances are meant to address is caused by the very conditions of Victorian life that make the substances necessary. The irregular work hours disrupt natural sleep rhythms. The poor air quality causes respiratory problems that interfere with breathing during sleep. The stress and overcrowding create anxiety that prevents rest. The medicines offer relief from symptoms while the underlying causes remain unaddressed and largely unacknowledged. Tonight, as you will every night, you'll reach for your bottle. You'll measure out your dose with the practiced hand of someone who's been doing this for years. You'll swallow it down and wait for that familiar softening, that gentle chemical blanket that makes sleep possible. And you'll try not to think too hard about what this means, about what you're becoming, about whether future generations will look back on this era with the same horrified fascination you feel when reading about historical opium dens in China. You're walking home from work as dusk settles over London, and you pass one of the doss houses that line the streets near the river. The sign outside reads "Clean beds, 4d," which is already a lie because nothing in this neighbourhood is truly clean, but the price is accurate enough. You've never been inside one of these establishments. Your circumstances haven't quite deteriorated to that point. But you know people who have, and their descriptions haunt you with the particular horror of possibilities that feel uncomfortably close. The most infamous sleeping arrangement in these places is what everyone calls the coffin bed. though the proprietors prefer euphemisms like individual sleeping boxes or private compartments. They're exactly what they sound like. Wooden boxes barely large enough for a human body, stacked 3 or 4 high along the walls like storage units for the living. You climb into your assigned coffin, pull a thin blanket over yourself, and try to ignore the fact that you're essentially rehearsing for your own burial. The boxes are too short for most men to lie flat, so you sleep curled on your side, your knees drawn up, breathing air that's already been breathed by the person in the box above you. At least the coffin beds offer horizontal rest, which is more than can be said for the penny hangs. You've seen these through the windows of the worst doss houses, though the operators usually keep the curtains drawn to preserve their customers' dignity. A thick rope is strung across the room at roughly chest height, and men, they're almost always men, drape themselves over it like wet clothes on a line. They pay their penny, take their position along the rope and sleep standing up, their arms hooked over the rope to prevent falling, their bodies swaying gently whenever someone shifts position down the line. The genius of the penny hang, from a business perspective, is its efficiency. You can pack 40 or 50 men into a space that might accommodate 10 lying down sleepers. The rope supports their weight, so there's no need for beds, mattresses, or even floor space. At 5 in the morning, the proprietor walks down the line with a knife and cuts the rope, and everyone collapses to the floor in a confused, angry heap. This serves as both wake-up call and eviction notice, clearing the space for the next shift of desperate sleepers. Your friend William tried the penny hang once during a particularly bad week when he couldn't scrape together enough for proper lodging. He described it as the worst night of his life, which is saying something given the general quality of his life. You can't really sleep, he explained. You just sort of fade in and out of consciousness while your arms go numb and your legs cramp. Every time someone moves, the whole rope shakes and everyone wakes up cursing, and the smell... He stopped there, some experiences being beyond adequate description. The 2-penny hang offers a marginal upgrade. The rope is positioned lower, allowing men to sit on a bench with the rope across their chests to prevent them from falling forward when unconsciousness takes them. This is considered luxury accommodation by the standards of London's most desperate. You get to sit down, which is significantly more comfortable than standing, and the bench distributes your weight more evenly than the rope alone. You're still sleeping upright, still packed in with dozens of other exhausted men, still breathing the concentrated miasma of unwashed bodies and hopelessness. But at least your legs don't have to support you all night. There's a 3-penny option that includes a wooden board to lean against, which transforms the experience from torture into mere misery. Historians still argue whether these graduated penny prices represented genuine attempts to accommodate workers of different means, or whether they were simply ingenious methods of extracting maximum profit from people too exhausted to care about dignity. The answer is probably both. Victorian capitalism had a remarkable talent for commodifying desperation, while maintaining a veneer of charitable provision. The coffin beds themselves come in various qualities, which is to say various levels of degradation. The best ones, and best is doing a lot of work in that sentence, are made of relatively smooth wood and include a thin straw mattress. The worst are rough planks barely nailed together, splinter-prone and smelling of whatever fluids the previous occupant left behind. Some doss houses claim to clean the coffins between uses, others don't bother with the pretense. You take your chances, and mostly you're too tired to care. Each coffin has a small shelf for personal belongings, though keeping anything of value in such a place is optimistic to the point of delusion. Theft is rampant in these establishments, not because the residents are inherently criminal, but because poverty creates its own moral economy where survival trumps property rights. You learn quickly to sleep with your boots on and your coins hidden somewhere on your body, though this makes actual rest even more difficult than it already is. The doss houses operate on military efficiency, their schedules dictated by the rhythms of industrial labour. The rope sleepers arrive first, those working late shifts who need a few hours of unconsciousness before their next job. Around midnight, the coffin bed occupants arrive, paying their 4p and climbing into their boxes. By 2 in the morning, the building is packed with sleeping humanity, every available space occupied by someone trying to steal a few hours of rest from a life that offers precious few opportunities for it. The deputy keeper walks the rows throughout the night, occasionally poking anyone who's snoring too loudly or has stopped breathing in a concerning way. Deaths in doss houses aren't uncommon. Men with weak hearts, chronic illnesses, or simply exhaustion beyond what human bodies can sustain will sometimes not wake up when the rope is cut or the morning bell rings. The deputy's job includes distinguishing between the deeply sleeping and the permanently sleeping, a task that apparently becomes routine after a few months. Some doss houses offer an alternative for women, though these are rarer and often more expensive. The 4p sit-up provides a chair in a common room where women can doze upright, though actual sleeping is discouraged by deputies who walk the room periodically to ensure everyone remains more or less conscious. The logic, such as it is, relates to Victorian propriety. Women sleeping deeply in public spaces might be vulnerable to interference, so it's safer to keep them in a state of exhausted semi-consciousness where they can theoretically defend themselves. You pass the doss house entrance now, and you can see men queuing up for the night, their faces wearing that particular expression of exhausted resignation that you recognise from your own mirror on bad mornings. They're clutching their pennies or 4p pieces, mentally calculating whether they can afford horizontal rest, or whether tonight will be another standing up affair. Some of them are making jokes. Gallows humour is the privilege of people who have nothing left to lose, but most are simply silent, conserving energy for whatever tomorrow will demand. The smell that wafts from the doorway is indescribable, though that won't stop you from trying to describe it later. It's unwashed bodies multiplied by dozens, mixed with the particular staleness of spaces that never get proper ventilation, combined with urine from the overflowing communal bucket in the corner, and underneath it all, the sweet, sick smell of illness and decay that seems to permeate every building in this part of London. You breathe through your mouth and walk faster. Inside your own rented room, cramped and uncomfortable as it is, you suddenly feel wealthy beyond measure. You have a proper bed, horizontal and yours alone, except when sharing with Margaret. You have blankets, a pillow, even a mattress with all its horsehair lumps. You don't have to sleep in a coffin or draped over a rope. Don't have to worry about being robbed while unconscious or dumped on the floor at dawn. The gap between your circumstances and those of the doss house residents seems vast, though you know it's actually about 3 weeks of bad luck, a job loss, an illness, a robbery, and you could easily find yourself queuing up for your own penny hang. You wake at 2 in the morning with a familiar pressure in your bladder, and this presents the evening's most dreaded decision. Do you brave the chamber pot or try to wait until morning? The chamber pot sits beneath your bed, a squat ceramic vessel decorated with cheerful painted roses that seem deeply inappropriate given its function. You've been avoiding it since yesterday morning, hoping the night soil men completed their rounds in your building, but hope and Victorian sanitation rarely align in satisfying ways. The chamber pot is a fact of life, in a city where indoor plumbing remains a fantasy for most residents. Your building has a privy in the shared courtyard, accessible via a dark hallway and 2 flights of stairs, which might as well be a journey to the moon at 2 in the morning. The chamber pot represents the compromise between comfort and dignity, though it fails adequately at both. You use it now, trying not to wake Margaret, trying not to think about the fact that this porcelain vessel will sit beneath your bed until morning, its contents gradually contributing to the room's overall ambience. In the morning, one of you, usually Margaret, though you take turns when she's not here, will carry the pot down to the privy and empty it. This is one of those tasks that Victorian propriety insists never happened, that polite society refuses to acknowledge, despite the fact that every household in London performs this ritual daily. You'll see your neighbours in the hallway sometimes, also carrying their pots, and everyone will look determinedly at nothing, maintaining the fiction that human bodies don't produce waste, and chamber pots are merely decorative objects. The privy itself is a horror that you've learned to endure through sheer necessity. It's a wooden seat suspended over a brick-lined pit that's supposed to be emptied regularly by the night soil men, but often isn't. The smell in summer is beyond description, a physical presence that seems to coat your throat and lungs. In winter, it's cold enough that you risk frostbite on exposed skin during the transaction, which at least mercifully suppresses the smell somewhat. There's a hook on the door for a candle, but lighting it only illuminates conditions you'd prefer to experience in darkness. The night soil men arrive at unpredictable intervals, usually between midnight and dawn, to empty the cesspits and haul away the accumulated waste of London's population. You hear them sometimes during your wakeful hours between first and second sleep. The clank of their buckets, their muffled curses, the splash and scrape of their shovels. It's miserable work, paid miserably, and the men who do it are social pariahs, though everyone depends on them absolutely. Without the night soil men, London would drown in its own excrement within weeks. They carry the waste through the streets in covered carts, though covered is optimistic. The smell announces their approach from blocks away. The destination is supposedly treatment facilities outside the city, though rumours persist that much of it simply gets dumped in the Thames, which would explain why the river smells the way it does and why cholera sweeps through the city with such regularity. Historians still argue whether Victorian sanitation was worse than medieval systems, or simply more populated, making existing problems more visible and more deadly. In wealthier households, the ones you visit sometimes for work, they have more elaborate systems. Water closets are becoming fashionable among those who can afford them, though they're not necessarily an improvement. The early designs often lack proper venting, so they fill rooms with sewer gases that are both nauseating and flammable. Some have been known to explode, which gives a whole new meaning to the phrase going with a bang. And yes, Victorians make that joke constantly because dark humour is how you cope with indoor plumbing that occasionally detonates. Your building's privy serves 8 families, which means it's perpetually occupied during peak hours and perpetually disgusting at all hours. There's an informal schedule that everyone tries to follow: early morning before work, evening after dinner, but digestive systems don't always cooperate with social coordination. You've stood in line with your neighbours, everyone staring at the ground, nobody acknowledging the shared indignity of waiting for toilet access like it's a popular music hall attraction. The truly desperate situations happen during illness, when your body's demands become urgent and unignorable. Victorian London is plagued by digestive ailments. Cholera, typhoid, dysentery and generic griping of the bowels that could be anything from food poisoning to intestinal parasites. When these strike, the chamber pot becomes your closest companion, and the journey to empty it becomes a walk of shame that you attempt to execute with as much dignity as possible, which is to say, none whatsoever. Children complicate the chamber pot situation considerably. Young ones can't be expected to navigate dark hallways to outdoor privies, so they're trained to use small pots kept beside their beds. This means that a household with several children might have 4 or 5 chamber pots in various stages of fullness scattered throughout the sleeping areas. The morning procession to the privy takes on the quality of a very specific, very unpleasant parade. Some households have a dedicated slop bucket for chamber pot contents, theoretically keeping the actual pots cleaner and making the emptying process more efficient. In practice, this just means there's one more container of human waste sitting around your living space, contributing to the general atmosphere of barely contained biological reality that characterizes Victorian domestic life. You clean everything regularly, but clean is relative when you're dealing with ceramic vessels used for bodily waste in an age before proper disinfectants. The nighttime bathroom situation affects sleep in ways that Victorian medical literature rarely discusses. You wake need in the privy, but going there means getting fully out of your warm bed, lighting a candle, getting dressed enough to be decent in the hallways, navigating stairs in the dark, using a freezing outdoor facility, and then reversing the entire process. This can take 20 minutes, by which point you're fully awake and cold, and returning to sleep becomes difficult. The chamber pot solves this problem while creating others, namely that you're now sleeping in a room with a container of urine. Some people keep rose water or perfume near the chamber pot, adding a few drops to mask the smell. This creates a peculiar combination of floral sweetness and ammonia that's somehow worse than either smell alone. Others insist on covering the pot with a special doily or cloth, as if pretending it doesn't exist will somehow improve the situation. The most practical approach is simply to empty it as frequently as possible and maintain a stoic acceptance that this is simply how life works when you're a Victorian without modern plumbing. Margaret handles the chamber pot duties with professional detachment, having apparently made peace with the fact that dealing with other people's bodily waste is part of her job description. You're grateful for this, though also vaguely ashamed, feeling that there's something fundamentally wrong with a society where some people empty chamber pots for others. But what's the alternative? Everyone empties their own, which you do when Margaret's not here, and which doesn't feel appreciably more dignified. The truly wealthy have servants who do nothing but manage household sanitation, emptying chamber pots, maintaining privies, dealing with all the biological realities that rich people prefer to pretend don't affect them. These servants are invisible in the social sense, expected to perform their duties without being seen or acknowledged, like sanitation fairies who magically make unpleasantness disappear. You wonder sometimes what those servants think about during their work. Whether they resent their employers or simply accept this as the natural order of things. As you settle back into bed after using the chamber pot, trying to reclaim your warm spot under the blankets, you're acutely aware that this is probably the least dignified aspect of Victorian sleep. Not the lumpy mattresses, not the shared beds, not even the opium-laced medicines. It's the simple biological fact that human bodies produce waste during the night, and dealing with that waste in a world without modern plumbing requires constant negotiation between comfort, propriety, and practical necessity. Future generations will probably mock you for this, if they remember you at all, though you suspect they'll have their own embarrassments that seem normal in their time. You're jerked from sleep by a sharp tapping sound, rhythmic and insistent, like a woodpecker attacking your window frame. For a moment you think you're dreaming, but the sound continues. Tap, 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 and then you remember. It's Monday, which means the knocker-upper is making her rounds. You stumble to the window and peer through the gap in the curtains to see Mrs. Pettigrew standing in the street below. Her long bamboo pole extended upward, a collection of dried peas in a pouch at the end that she's using to rattle against your specific window with impressive accuracy. The knocker-upper is one of those Victorian professions that will seem completely absurd to future generations, but right now, in 1875, it's absolutely essential. Alarm clocks exist, but they're expensive and unreliable, prone to stopping in the night or simply not being loud enough to wake heavy sleepers. Factory whistles blow at the start of shifts, but by the time you hear them, you're already late. The knocker-upper solves this problem by being a human alarm clock, paid a few pence per week to ensure you wake at your specified time. Mrs. Pettigrew has been doing this job for 15 years, and she knows every working person's schedule in a 6-block radius. She wakes the bakers at 3 in the morning, the factory workers at 5, the shop assistants at 6, and the office clerks at 7. She never mixes up the times, never forgets a customer, and never sleeps past her own wake-up time, which you've always wondered about. Who wakes the knocker-upper? According to local legend, Mrs. Pettigrew simply doesn't sleep, existing in a state of perpetual alertness that allows her to be London's most reliable timekeeper. The knocker-upper's tools vary by practitioner. Mrs. Pettigrew prefers her bamboo pole with the pea shooter attachment, which allows her to wake people on upper floors without having to shout and disturb the entire street. Other knocker-uppers use longer poles with soft hammers, gently tapping windows until the occupant acknowledges their wake-up call. Some use pea shooters that fire dried peas directly at bedroom windows, though this method occasionally results in broken glass and angry customers. The really skilled knocker-uppers can differentiate between windows on the same building, waking only their paying customers while leaving non-paying neighbours asleep. This requires intimate knowledge of a building layouts and the ability to judge angles and distances in the dark, often while standing in fog thick enough to hide your own feet. Mrs. Pettigrew is an artist at this, her peas rattling your window, and only your window, a precise percussion that penetrates sleep without creating a neighbourhood-wide disturbance. You acknowledge her with a hand gesture through this window, the agreed-upon signal that you're awake and she can move on to her next customer. She tips her cap and disappears into the fog, her footsteps already fading as she heads toward the factory district where dozens of workers need waking in the next 20 minutes. The efficiency of her rounds is remarkable, a testament to years of optimization and an internal clock that apparently runs more accurately than any mechanical timepiece. The profession has its hierarchy, like everything in Victorian society. The best knocker-uppers work wealthy neighbourhoods, where customers pay more and the hours are more civilised. Nobody wants to be woken at 3 in the morning unless absolutely necessary. The lower-tier knocker-uppers handle the factory districts and docklands, working brutal hours for minimal pay, trudging through London's worst weather to wake people who can barely afford the service but absolutely need it to keep their jobs. Some knocker-uppers specialise in particular professions. There are those who wake only fishmongers, timing their rounds to the rhythm of Billingsgate Market. Others focus on newspaper deliverers, ensuring the morning papers actually arrive in the morning. Historians still argue whether the knocker-upper profession was a legitimate service industry, or just another symptom of Victorian society's inability to solve problems with actual infrastructure, instead relying on human labour to patch systemic failures. The method of payment varies by arrangement. Some customers pay weekly, settling accounts on Saturday evening. Others pay monthly, though this requires trust that the knocker-upper will continue providing service even when payment is weeks away. A few pay daily, handing over a penny each morning in exchange for yesterday's wake-up call, which creates an interesting incentive structure. Fail to wake someone, and they don't pay, which ensures quality control through direct financial consequences. The profession attracts interesting personalities. Mrs. Pettigrew is all business, professional to the point of being intimidating. But you've heard about knocker-uppers in other neighbourhoods who gossip with their customers, sharing news and rumours collected during their pre-dawn rounds. Some are known for their reliability, others for their creative insults when customers are slow to acknowledge their knocking. A few have developed signature calls or whistles that their regular customers recognise, turning the wake-up process into a more personalised experience. The job has occupational hazards. Aggressive dogs are an obvious problem, as are slippery cobblestones in the dark, drunk people stumbling home at odd hours, and the occasional criminal who sees a lone person walking the streets with pockets full of collected pennies as an opportunity. Mrs. Pettigrew carries a stout walking stick that she claims is for balance, but which everyone knows serves a dual purpose. She's had to use it more than once, according to neighbourhood rumours, and apparently she's quite effective with it. Weather makes the job particularly miserable. Rain soaks through clothing during hours-long rounds, fog makes navigation treacherous, and winter ice turns the whole endeavour into a dangerous balancing act. Snow muffles the knocking sounds, requiring harder strikes that might break windows, and summer heat exhaustion is a real concern during the longest days. Yet the knocker-uppers continue their rounds, because people need waking and wages need earning, and Victorian capitalism doesn't particularly care about comfort. The relationship between knocker-upper and customer can become quite intimate over time. Mrs. Pettigrew knows things about your life that even close friends don't. When you're home, when you're not, when you've had guests staying over, when you've changed jobs and need different wake-up times. She knows which mornings you're slow to respond and might need extra knocking, and which mornings you're at the window immediately, already dressed and ready to start your day. There's an unspoken agreement that knocker-uppers will be discreet about what they observe during their rounds. They see people in states of undress through windows, overhear arguments in the early morning hours, notice when someone doesn't come home at all. This knowledge could be valuable. Blackmail material, gossip currency, information to sell to interested parties. But the good knocker-uppers maintain professional silence. Breaking confidentiality would cost them customers, and reputation is everything in a service profession. You wonder sometimes how the knocker-uppers themselves manage sleep. Mrs. Pettigrew must finish her rounds by 8 or 9 in the morning, at which point she presumably goes home to sleep for a few hours before beginning her afternoon and evening preparations for the next morning's rounds. This schedule must be exhausting, though she never shows it, always appearing with the same brisk efficiency regardless of weather or season. The profession won't last forever. You can sense that already. As alarm clocks become cheaper and more reliable, as people find alternative ways to ensure punctual waking, the knocker-uppers will gradually become obsolete. But for now, in this particular moment of Victorian London, their essential infrastructure, human alarm systems walking the foggy streets, keeping the city running on time through personal attention and bamboo poles, and an apparently supernatural ability to wake people precisely when needed. You're lying in bed on a stormy Tuesday evening, and your landlady, Mrs. Blackwood, has decided this is the perfect time to read ghost stories aloud to the household. Everyone's gathered in the parlour except you. You can hear them downstairs. Mrs. Blackwood's voice rising and falling with theatrical emphasis as she recounts some tale of restless spirits and midnight hauntings. This strikes you as perfectly normal Victorian behaviour, this practice of deliberately frightening yourself before attempting to sleep, and somehow it actually works better than you'd expect. The Victorians have developed an entire culture around bedtime horror, and it's not despite their sleep difficulties, but seemingly because of them. Ghost stories are considered ideal evening entertainment, recommended by doctors and social commentators as wholesome family activity. The logic, such as it is, suggests that controlled fear provides an emotional release that paradoxically helps people relax. You scare yourself thoroughly with fictional terrors and your real anxieties. Poverty, disease, industrial accident, social disgrace temporarily seem less pressing by comparison. Charles Dickens published A Christmas Carol, not as a cheerful holiday tale, but as a ghost story, meant to be read aloud on winter evenings when darkness comes early and the wind makes the house creak in unsettling ways. The story features 3 spirits visiting in the night, disturbing Scrooge's sleep with visions of death and judgment. This is considered appropriate family entertainment, suitable for children as young as 5 or 6. The Victorians, you've noticed, have very different ideas about what constitutes relaxing bedtime material. Collections of ghost stories are bestsellers, passed around neighbourhoods until the pages are worn soft from handling. Emsar James, who will become famous for his ghost stories of an antiquary, follows a specific formula. Respectable protagonists encounter supernatural horrors in ordinary settings, usually just as they're preparing for bed. The stories end ambiguously, suggesting that the horror isn't resolved but simply waiting for the next victim. Reading these before sleep should be nightmare fuel, but somehow it becomes comforting. At least the ghosts in stories are predictable, following narrative rules, unlike the chaos of actual Victorian life. Mrs. Blackwood has reached the climax of her story now, her voice dropping to a dramatic whisper that somehow carries more effectively than her normal speaking volume. You can hear the sharp intake of breath from the other listeners as something terrible is revealed, followed by nervous laughter as everyone releases the tension. This communal experience of fear and relief apparently creates social bonds while simultaneously preparing everyone for sleep, though the psychology behind this seems backwards to modern sensibilities. The periodicals are full of serialized ghost stories, designed to be read in installments over weeks or months. The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins kept readers awake at night, anxiously awaiting the next installment while simultaneously dreading what horrors it might contain. The tension between wanting to know what happens next and not wanting to be frightened is apparently pleasurable, a form of entertainment that thrives on making people uncomfortable in their own homes, especially after dark. Historians still argue whether Victorian ghost story obsession reflected genuine belief in the supernatural or simply represented safe exploration of death and anxiety in a society where both were omnipresent. The answer is probably both. Educated Victorians might intellectually dismiss ghosts while emotionally finding the stories deeply unsettling. The ambiguity is part of the appeal. You can enjoy being frightened while maintaining plausible deniability about whether you actually believe in ghosts. Children are particularly targeted with frightening bedtime stories, which seems cruel until you understand the Victorian logic. Childhood is preparation for a harsh world, and learning to manage fear through stories is considered useful training. Fairy tales in their original versions are genuinely horrifying. Children are abandoned in forests, eaten by wolves, murdered by jealous relatives, transformed into animals, and generally subjected to terrors that make modern children's literature seem impossibly sanitized. Your own childhood bedtime stories featured more corpses than lullabies. Struwell Peter was a particular favourite, with its tales of children who sucked their thumbs until a tailor cut them off with giant scissors, or refused to eat until they died of starvation, or played with matches and burned to death. These stories were presented as moral instruction, meant to frighten you into good behaviour, but that also normalised horror as part of the domestic nighttime routine. The ghost story tradition extends beyond books and into actual household practices. People conduct seances in their parlours, attempting to contact dead relatives, with results that range from embarrassing to genuinely unsettling. The spiritualist movement has convinced thousands of Victorians that the veil between living and dead is thin, permeable, and frequently crossed by spirits with unfinished business. Whether this helps people sleep better, knowing their dead loved ones might be watching over them, or worse, knowing their dead loved ones might be watching them, is a matter of individual temperament. Mrs. Blackwood finishes her story with a flourish, and you hear the scraping of chairs as people prepare to head to their respective bedrooms. Someone jokes about checking under their bed for ghosts, and everyone laughs a bit too loudly, the nervous laughter of people who've enjoyed being frightened but now have to navigate dark hallways to reach their sleeping quarters. You hear footsteps on the stairs, someone calling good night, the general shuffle of a household settling in for the evening. The peculiar thing is that this ritual actually seems to work. After an hour of ghost stories, your own anxieties feel smaller. The terror of fictional haunted houses makes your actual cramped, coal smoke-filled bedroom seem comfortingly mundane. You're not being pursued by vengeful spirits or cursed by ancient evils. You're just an ordinary person trying to sleep in an ordinary Victorian bed, which suddenly feels like a blessing rather than a burden. Some doctors actively recommend ghost stories as sleep aids, though their reasoning is questionable. One popular theory suggests that the excitement of being frightened, followed by the relief of realizing you're safe, creates a physiological response that promotes sleep. Your heart races during the scary parts, then slows dramatically when the story ends, and this deceleration supposedly carries you naturally into drowsiness. Whether this is actual science or Victorian pseudo-medicine is unclear, but people swear it works. The ghost story tradition also serves another function. It gives people permission to discuss death, loss, and fear in a society that otherwise demands emotional restraint. You can't openly discuss your terror of dying in a factory accident or your grief over a child lost to scarlet fever. But you can discuss the fictional ghost of a murdered woman or the spectral appearance of a dead relative. The stories become vessels for processing real emotions that Victorian propriety otherwise forbids acknowledging. Do you remember the last time you deliberately scared yourself before bed? There's something primal about it, this practice of confronting fears in controlled settings. The Victorians understood this instinctively, building an entire entertainment industry around bedtime horror. They recognised that sometimes the best way to face your actual terrors, disease, poverty, social ruin, early death, is to first face some imaginary ones. You wake from a particularly vivid dream feeling vaguely guilty, though you can't quite remember what happened in it. This guilt is itself unremarkable. Victorian culture has trained you to feel morally responsible for your own dreams, as if the unconscious mind were subject to the same rules of propriety that govern waking behaviour. At breakfast, Mrs. Blackwood asks if you slept well, and you lie automatically saying yes, because admitting to disturbing dreams would invite questions about your moral character that you'd rather not address before your morning tea. The Victorians have developed an elaborate anxiety around dream content that borders on obsession. Dreams are believed to reflect your innermost character, revealing truths about your moral state that waking behaviour might conceal. A respectable person should have respectable dreams, pleasant visions of pastoral landscapes, deceased relatives offering wisdom, perhaps the occasional mildly thrilling adventure that remains within bounds of propriety. Anything else suggests that your unconscious mind harbours inappropriate thoughts, which in turn suggests that your conscious virtue might be a facade. Medical journals publish earnest articles about dream management, offering advice on how to ensure proper dream content through careful regulation of evening activities. Reading improving literature before bed supposedly produces elevating dreams. Eating light suppers prevents the digestive disturbances that lead to nightmares. Maintaining pure thoughts during the day should theoretically result in pure thoughts during the night. The underlying assumption is that dreams are controllable through moral discipline, that your sleeping mind should be as carefully monitored as your waking behaviour. The reality, of course, is that dreams follow no such rules. Your unconscious mind produces whatever bizarre scenarios it pleases, without regard for Victorian propriety or your own preferences. You've dreamed things that would scandalise Mrs. Blackwood, experienced imaginary scenarios that have no connection to your actual desires or character, but you've learned never to discuss these dreams, to edit your dream narratives when social situations require sharing them, to maintain the fiction that your sleeping mind is as carefully controlled as your waking deportment. Women face particular scrutiny regarding their dreams. A woman who dreams of romance with inappropriate men, men of lower social status, married men, or heaven forbid, multiple men, reveals herself to be potentially immoral, even if she never acts on such thoughts while awake. Dream journals are sometimes kept and sometimes reviewed by husbands or family members, monitoring the unconscious mind for signs of wayward tendencies. Historians still argue whether this dream surveillance was widespread or limited to particularly controlling households, but the anxiety about it was certainly universal. Your friend Elizabeth confided once that she'd dreamed of flying, soaring over London's rooftops with a sense of freedom that felt almost sinful in its intensity. She woke feeling exhilarated and then immediately guilty, worried that desiring such freedom, even in dreams, revealed some fundamental defect in her character. She spent the next week being extra conscientious in her duties, as if perfect waking behaviour could compensate for her unconscious transgression. You didn't tell her that flying dreams are common, that they probably mean nothing beyond your brain processing the sensation of falling asleep. Victorian culture doesn't allow for such mundane explanations. The medical establishment takes dream content very seriously indeed. Dream analysis is considered a legitimate diagnostic tool, with doctors asking detailed questions about patients' nightmares to identify underlying health problems. Recurrent dreams of falling supposedly indicate heart weakness. Dreams of being chased suggest nervous exhaustion. Dreams of teeth falling out? Well, those could mean anything from digestive issues to moral decay, depending on which doctor you ask. The variety of interpretations suggests that perhaps nobody actually knows what dreams mean, but that doesn't stop anyone from having strong opinions. Religious authorities contribute their own concerns about dream content. Priests and ministers warn that Satan can enter your mind through dreams, planting sinful thoughts and desires that might influence your waking behaviour. Morning prayers often include requests for forgiveness for whatever inappropriate thoughts you might have entertained during the night, even if you can't remember them. The assumption is that you probably dreamed something shameful, and it's better to apologize preemptively than risk divine judgment for unconscious sins. The anxiety extends to children's dreams as well. Parents question their children each morning about what they dreamed, looking for signs of moral development or corruption. A child who dreams of sweets and toys is normal. A child who dreams of violence or rebellion requires corrective intervention, extra Bible study, restricted reading material, perhaps consultation with a doctor about whether the child's moral education has been neglected. The pressure to have acceptable dreams starts young, training children to monitor and edit their own unconscious experiences. Some people take extreme measures to control their dream content. Special dream pillows stuffed with lavender and other herbs supposedly promote peaceful sleep and pleasant dreams. Sleeping with a Bible under your pillow is thought to ward off nightmares and demonic influences. Certain prayers recited before bed allegedly create a protective barrier around your sleeping mind, keeping out inappropriate thoughts and influences. Whether any of this works is questionable, but it provides the comfort of feeling like you're doing something to manage the unmanageable. The laudanum that so many people take before bed has its own effects on dreams. Opiate-influenced sleep produces vivid, sometimes bizarre dreams that users learn to expect and navigate. These drug dreams exist in a moral grey area. Are you responsible for dreams caused by medicine? The answer seems to depend on whether the dream was pleasant or disturbing. Pleasant drug dreams are simply side effects. Disturbing ones still reflect something about your character. The logic is inconsistent, but consistency isn't Victorian culture's strongest attribute. Nightmare treatment is a small industry unto itself. Doctors prescribe various remedies, different sleeping positions, special diets, medications to calm the nerves, even devices that supposedly prevent rolling onto your back, which is believed to cause nightmares by putting pressure on your heart. Some of these remedies are harmless placebos, others involve concerning levels of medication that probably cause more problems than they solve. But the underlying message is clear. If you're having bad dreams, it's your responsibility to fix them. The social implications of dream content can be serious. A servant who mentions dreaming about her employer in any context might find herself dismissed, regardless of the dream's actual content. The very fact of dreaming about someone above your station suggests inappropriate familiarity. A man who admits to recurring nightmares might be considered too mentally weak for positions of responsibility. Dreams become another thing to carefully guard and edit, another aspect of private life that must be managed to maintain social standing. There's a peculiar double standard around nightmares specifically. Having occasional nightmares about acceptable things, being chased by wild animals, falling from heights, losing your way in fog, is normal and even sympathetic. But having frequent nightmares, or nightmares about specific disturbing content, suggests either medical problems or moral weakness. The line between normal and abnormal is vague, shifting and subject to social judgment, which means everyone is perpetually anxious about whether their dream life falls within acceptable parameters. You've learned to keep a mental catalogue of acceptable dream narratives that you can deploy when social situations require discussing your sleep. Dreams about work are always safe. They suggest dedication to your responsibilities. Dreams about deceased relatives are acceptable and even touching. Dreams about pleasant countryside scenes demonstrate proper appreciation for natural beauty. These sanitized versions bear little resemblance to your actual dreams, but maintaining the fiction is easier than facing the social consequences of honesty. The irony, which you perceive dimly through your morning tiredness, is that all this anxiety about dreams probably makes the dreams worse. The more you worry about having inappropriate dreams, the more your anxious brain produces exactly the content you're trying to avoid. Victorian culture has created a self-fulfilling prophecy where concern about dream content generates the very nightmares that justify the concern in the first place. But suggesting this would require admitting that unconscious minds don't respond to moral discipline, which would undermine too many assumptions about character and control. You're preparing for bed and suddenly remember Dr. Richardson's stern lecture about sleep position from last month's medical journal. According to his research, and he seemed very confident about this, sleeping on your left side will kill you within 5 years, as it compresses the heart and prevents proper circulation. Or was it the right side that's dangerous? You stand there in your nightshirt, genuinely uncertain, trying to remember which side will doom you and which will ensure your survival, and this is the kind of absurd anxiety that Victorian medical science inflicts on people nightly. The science of sleep position has become a battlefield of competing theories, each promoted by doctors who seem absolutely certain of their conclusions, despite having completely contradictory advice. Dr. Hall insists that sleeping on your back is the only natural position, allowing the spine to rest properly and the organs to settle into their correct locations. Dr. Carpenter argues that back sleeping is dangerous, causing the tongue to block the airway and potentially suffocating you in your sleep. Both men have published books on the subject. Both men are apparently respected in their field. Both men cannot possibly be correct. The right side versus left side debate has consumed considerable medical attention and generated impressive amounts of pseudo-scientific reasoning. The right side advocates claim that this position aids digestion by allowing the stomach to empty properly downward. The left side supporters argue that right side sleeping puts pressure on the liver and should be avoided at all costs. Some doctors split the difference, recommending that you begin the night on your right side and migrate to your left side after your first sleep period, which requires either remarkable body awareness during unconsciousness or simply gives up on the entire premise. Then there's the question of which direction your head should face while sleeping, which has somehow become entangled with magnetic theory and mystical nonsense. Some authorities insist that sleeping with your head facing north aligns you with Earth's magnetic field, promoting healthful sleep and possibly extending your lifespan. Others claim that east-facing sleep is ideal, allowing you to wake naturally as the sun rises. A few contrarian doctors argue that the direction doesn't matter at all, which would be refreshing if they didn't immediately follow this with equally dubious advice about pillow height or mattress firmness. The pillow situation has its own complicated politics. Too many pillows allegedly cause spinal curvature and breathing difficulties. Too few pillows result in insufficient head elevation, leading to congestion and poor blood flow to the brain. The ideal number of pillows is apparently somewhere between 1 and 3, with the exact number depending on your body type, age, health status, and probably your moral character for all you can tell. You currently use 2 pillows, which seems like a safe middle ground, though you're probably condemning yourself to some terrible fate that hasn't been discovered yet. Some doctors recommend sleeping without any pillow at all, flat on your back like a corpse, which is supposed to maintain the natural curve of the spine and prevent wrinkles on your face. This position is deeply uncomfortable and makes you feel like you're already dead, but apparently it's scientifically superior to the comfortable positions that humans naturally prefer. Historians still argue whether anyone actually followed this advice, or whether it existed primarily to make patients feel guilty about their sleeping habits. Your arms pose another challenge. Sleeping with your arms above your head supposedly causes circulation problems and numbness. Sleeping with them tucked under your body creates pressure points that could lead to nerve damage. Sleeping with them at your side seems safest, but then your hands sometimes swell overnight, which one doctor attributed to improper arm positioning and another blamed on excessive salt consumption. The human body has apparently evolved to make comfortable sleep anatomically impossible, or at least that's what Victorian medical literature would have you believe. The legs have their own requirements. Some authorities insist that sleeping with bent knees is essential for spinal health. Others argue that straight legs maintain proper posture and prevent muscle shortening. A few recommend placing a pillow between your knees if you sleep on your side, which adds another pillow to your bed and creates complex logistical questions about how to maintain this arrangement while unconscious. You've tried various positions and mostly ended up waking in whatever position your body naturally assumed during the night, rendering all the medical advice effectively useless. Women face additional sleep position restrictions tied to their reproductive organs. Sleeping on the stomach is sometimes prohibited, supposedly causing displacement of the uterus, a Victorian medical obsession that blamed every female ailment on wandering reproductive organs. Pregnant women receive particularly detailed instructions about acceptable sleep positions, with some doctors drawing elaborate diagrams showing precisely how a pregnant body should be arranged during rest. Whether any of this has any basis in reality or is simply another method of controlling women's bodies is a question that won't be seriously examined for decades. The temperature regulation aspects of sleep position create yet another layer of complexity. Sleeping on your side supposedly keeps you warmer than sleeping on your back, as you expose less surface area to the cold air. But sleeping in a tight fetal position while maximizing warmth allegedly causes breathing restriction and poor circulation. The ideal position apparently involves being simultaneously compact enough to stay warm but extended enough to breathe properly, which describes no position that any human body can actually maintain. Some households develop elaborate rituals around achieving the correct sleep position. Children are tucked in with specific arrangements, their limbs positioned according to whatever theory their parents currently believe. Spouses monitor each other's sleep positions, occasionally waking their partners to adjust them into presumably healthier arrangements. The result is interrupted sleep in service of theoretical sleep improvement, which seems counterproductive but is embraced with the earnestness that Victorians bring to all forms of self-improvement. The medical establishment offers various devices to enforce proper sleep positioning. There are straps and harnesses designed to keep you on your side or back, preventing you from rolling into dangerous positions during the night. Special pillows claim to maintain ideal head and neck angles. Mattresses are designed with different firmness levels in different areas, supposedly encouraging your body to arrange itself correctly. Whether any of these devices work is questionable, but they're certainly profitable for their manufacturers. You've noticed that sleep position advice tends to reflect whatever an anatomical theory is currently fashionable. When doctors were obsessed with digestive health, sleep position advice focused on stomach orientation. During periods of concern about heart disease, the emphasis shifted to positions that allegedly reduced cardiac strain. Now that nervous exhaustion is the medical panic du jour, sleep positions are evaluated based on their effects on the nervous system. The advice changes, but the certainty with which it's delivered remains constant. The contradictions in sleep position science would be funny if they weren't contributing to your nightly anxiety. You climb into bed trying to remember which position is currently considered healthful, attempting to arrange your limbs according to specifications that may or may not have any medical validity, knowing that within minutes of falling asleep you'll probably shift into whatever position your unconscious body prefers anyway. The Victorian compulsion to optimize and regulate every aspect of human existence has transformed even the simple act of lying down into a complex medical procedure requiring expertise you don't possess. As you finally settle into bed, you choose to sleep on your right side because that's what feels comfortable, regardless of what Dr. Richardson or any other medical authority recommends. Your body has been sleeping for years without your conscious guidance, and it seems to have managed adequately. The medical profession's obsession with correct sleep positioning is probably less about actual health and more about the Victorian need to believe that proper behaviour and scientific knowledge can protect you from the chaos of existence. It can't, of course, but maintaining that belief apparently helps people sleep at night, in whatever position they find themselves upon waking. You're helping Margaret strip the bed for one of its quarterly deep cleanings, and as you pull back the sheets, something moves in the horsehair mattress. This isn't surprising. The mattress is essentially a fabric bag filled with organic material that has become a thriving ecosystem over the 3 years you've owned it. The horsehair itself has compressed into irregular lumps that migrate around the mattress like living things, creating new uncomfortable spots just when you have adapted to the old ones. This is normal. This is what mattresses do in Victorian London, where hygienic bedding is an aspiration rather than a reality. The great mattress debates of the Victorian era centre on what should go inside them, with each filling material having passionate advocates and equally passionate detractors. Horsehair is considered superior, durable, resilient, and expensive enough to signal middle-class respectability. Your mattress cost nearly a month's wages when new, and it should theoretically last a decade or more, though last is doing considerable work in that sentence. The horsehair has developed a distinctive smell, musty and vaguely animal, that no amount of airing seems to eliminate completely. Straw mattresses occupy the bottom of the respectability hierarchy, but the top of the affordability scale. The working poor sleep on straw, which has the advantage of being cheap and readily available, and the disadvantage of being straw. It compresses flat within months, harbours insects with enthusiasm, and becomes damp and mouldy in London's perpetually humid climate. You slept on straw as a child, and you remember waking with mysterious rashes and the constant rustling sound that accompanied any movement. Upgrading to horsehair felt like ascending to royalty, though your current relationship with your horsehair mattress is more complicated. Feather mattresses represent the luxury end of the market, stuffed with goose or duck down and priced accordingly. The wealthy sleep on clouds of feathers, sinking into softness that supposedly promotes healthful rest. The reality is more problematic. Feathers compress unevenly, creating valleys that sleepers roll into helplessly. They're also nearly impossible to clean, becoming repositories for years of human skin cells, sweat, and the various fluids that bodies produce during sleep. Historians still argue whether featherbeds were genuinely comfortable or simply status symbols that the wealthy endured to display their affluence. The hygiene situation with all mattress types is frankly horrifying by any reasonable standard. Your mattress is supposed to be turned regularly, flipped and rotated to distribute wear evenly, but this requires 2 people and considerable effort, so it happens less frequently than recommended. The mattress is supposed to be beaten to redistribute the filling and dislodge dust, but this creates clouds of particulate matter that set everyone coughing and probably cause more health problems than they solve. Deep cleaning involves removing the ticking, the fabric cover, and replacing or cleaning the filling, a process so labour-intensive that most people simply don't do it. Inside your mattress, along with the horsehair, lives a thriving population of bedbugs, dust mites, and possibly other creatures you'd prefer not to contemplate. The bedbugs are the most problematic, emerging at night to feed on sleeping humans with enthusiasm that borders on admirable if it weren't so deeply unpleasant. You've tried various remedies, dusting the mattress with sulphur powder, washing the frame with kerosene, even attempting to starve them out by sleeping elsewhere for a week. But they persist with the resilience of creatures perfectly adapted to Victorian living conditions. Margaret is now beating your mattress in the courtyard, wielding a carpet beater with impressive force, and clouds of dust billow out with each strike. This dust is mostly dead skin cells. You shed them constantly during sleep, and they accumulate in the mattress over months and years, creating a gradually expanding layer of your own decomposed body. This thought is deeply unpleasant, so you try not to dwell on it, though it's difficult to ignore when you can literally see the evidence floating in the afternoon sunlight. The lower classes sometimes resort to flock mattresses, stuffed with fabric scraps and textile waste from mills and factories. These are the cheapest option aside from straw, and they share straw's main characteristics: rapid compression, insect hospitality, and the tendency to become lumpy and misshapen within weeks. Some flock mattresses contain materials that probably shouldn't be anywhere near human skin. Dyed fabrics with toxic chemicals, wool contaminated with industrial processes, random textile waste that nobody bothered to clean before stuffing it into mattress casings. The truly desperate sleep on mattresses stuffed with anything available: rags, paper, dried grass, even seaweed in coastal areas. These improvised mattresses are better than sleeping on bare floors, but not by much. They provide minimal cushioning, no support, and create their own hygiene problems as the organic materials decompose slowly inside their fabric casings. You've seen such mattresses in the homes of the very poor, thin and sad-looking, offering comfort that's more theoretical than actual. Mattress maintenance is supposed to be a regular household activity, but theory and practice diverge significantly. You're supposed to air your mattress weekly, dragging it to a window or outside to expose it to sunlight and fresh air, which allegedly kills bed bugs and eliminates odours. In practice, mattresses are heavy and awkward. Windows are small, and London's fresh air is mostly coal smoke anyway, so this happens sporadically at best. The mattress spends most of its time in the same position, slowly accumulating whatever accumulates in mattresses while humans sleep on them. The wealthy have mattress services that come periodically to collect mattresses for professional cleaning and refurbishment. The mattresses are taken away, emptied, cleaned, refilled and returned, allegedly sanitized and refreshed. Whether this actually improves them or simply redistributes the same problems is unclear, but it's expensive enough that you'll never find out firsthand. Your mattress cleaning consists of Margaret beating it in the courtyard and possibly running a damp cloth over the ticking, which is better than nothing, but not by much. Some Victorian reformers are beginning to advocate for spring mattresses. Coiled metal springs covered with padding and fabric, as more hygienic alternatives to traditional stuffed mattresses. These are starting to appear in hotels and wealthy homes, promising better support and easier cleaning. The springs don't compress like organic materials, don't harbour insects as easily, and can theoretically last longer. They also create new problems. Springs break, poke through fabric, and produce distinctive squeaking sounds during any nighttime activities that involve movement, which everyone finds mortifying but nobody discusses. You're developing an increasingly complicated relationship with your mattress. It's simultaneously essential and terrible, providing the minimum support necessary for sleep while creating countless small discomforts that accumulate into chronic sleep disruption. The lumps seem to position themselves precisely where your hip or shoulder needs to rest. The bed bugs are most active just as you're falling asleep, creating itching that jolts you back to consciousness. The smell is something you've mostly stopped noticing, which probably isn't a good sign. Margaret has finished beating the mattress and is now attempting to wrestle it back upstairs, and you help her navigate the narrow hallway and doorway. The mattress has somehow become heavier during its cleaning, possibly from absorbing moisture from the damp air, or possibly from sheer spite. You finally get it back onto the bed frame, and it settles with a small puff of dust that suggests the beating was only partially effective. As you remake the bed with fresh sheets, fresh meaning they've been washed once in the past fortnight, you reflect on the fact that you spend roughly a third of your life on this object, this accumulation of horsehair and dead skin cells and insects and mysterious lumps. Future generations will probably have better mattresses, just as they'll have better everything else. But for now, this is what sleep means. Lying on organic materials that slowly decompose beneath you, trying to find comfortable positions among the lumps, and pretending not to notice when something small and persistent bites you in the darkness. You're getting ready for bed and realize you've forgotten the most important part of the nightly ritual: getting properly dressed for sleep. This isn't simply a matter of removing your day clothes and collapsing into bed. That would be scandalous, possibly immoral, and definitely unhealthy, according to the prevailing medical wisdom. Instead, you must transform yourself into a properly attired Victorian sleeper, which involves more layers than you wear during some season's outdoor activities. The nightshirt awaits, along with the nightcap, bed socks, and possibly additional garments depending on the temperature and your commitment to respectability. The nightshirt is made of thick flannel that reaches your ankles and features a high collar that buttons up to your chin. It's designed to cover as much skin as possible because exposed skin during sleep is considered both immodest and medically inadvisable. The fabric is scratchy from years of washing with harsh soap, and it twists around your body during the night, creating uncomfortable bunching that wakes you periodically. But sleeping without a nightshirt would be unthinkable. Even alone in your room, Victorian propriety demands full coverage from neck to feet. The nightcap is equally essential. A cotton or flannel cap that covers your head completely, tied under your chin with ribbons. The medical reasoning involves preventing heat loss through the scalp, which apparently causes everything from headaches to brain fever to moral weakness. You've tried sleeping without it and woken with what might have been a mild headache, or might have been psychosomatic guilt about violating health protocols. The nightcap stays despite making you look ridiculous and creating additional warmth that you don't particularly need. Women's nighttime attire is even more elaborate, involving nightgowns that are essentially full-length dresses made of thick fabric, complete with sleeves, collars, and sometimes decorative elements that seem oddly formal for garments nobody will see. Margaret wears a nightgown that could probably be worn in public with minimal modification, covering her from neck to wrists to ankles, buttoned and tied and secured as if defending against attack. The idea of sleeping in less clothing would scandalise her genuinely, and not just because of what employers or society might think. Bed socks are non-negotiable during winter months. thick wool stockings that keep your feet warm but also make you feel vaguely suffocated in the way that too much wool always does. Some people wear them year-round, believing that cold feet cause various ailments regardless of actual air temperature. Your bed socks have been darned repeatedly, creating lumpy areas that press uncomfortably against your toes. But new socks are expensive and these are functionally adequate, which is all that Victorian thrift requires. In particularly cold weather, additional layers are added. You might wear a flannel waistcoat over your nightshirt, or even a knitted bed jacket that provides extra warmth without requiring you to pile on more blankets. Some people sleep in what amounts to full winter clothing under their nightshirts, creating such bulk that rolling over becomes a major undertaking. The line between being properly dressed for bed and being dressed for Arctic exploration becomes surprisingly blurry during London's coldest months. The wealthy have even more elaborate nighttime costumes. Silk nightshirts and gowns, embroidered nightcaps, velvet bed jackets trimmed with fur. Sleeping attire becomes an opportunity for displaying wealth even though the only witnesses are household members and possibly a spouse. Some wealthy women wear curl papers and various contraptions designed to maintain their hairstyles overnight, transforming their heads into architectural projects that make comfortable sleep practically impossible. Beauty apparently requires suffering even during unconsciousness. Men's nightshirts sometimes feature decorative elements that seem absurdly formal for sleeping: embroidered collars, fancy buttons, monogrammed pockets. These serve no practical purpose but signal that you're the sort of person who maintains standards even when nobody's watching. Your own nightshirt is plain and serviceable, but you've seen nightshirts in shop windows that cost more than you earn in a week, made from imported fabrics and tailored with precision that seems wasted on garments designed to be slept in. The modesty requirements extend to even the most private moments. You change into your nightshirt facing the wall, as if someone might be watching through this window, even though you're on the second floor and the curtains are drawn. This privacy theatre is so ingrained that you'd feel uncomfortable changing openly, even if you were absolutely alone. Margaret changes under her existing clothes, emerging from the complicated process fully nightgowned without ever having been immodest. A skill that probably took years to perfect. Some households require servants to wear specific nighttime attire as part of their uniform requirements. Margaret's nightgown, while her own property, must meet certain standards of coverage and propriety that your household enforces implicitly. In grander homes, servants might have designated sleeping attire that's provided by the employer, ensuring that even in sleep they're properly uniformed and recognizable as servants rather than family members. The nighttime dressing process takes significant time, enough that it becomes part of the wind-down ritual that supposedly prepares you for sleep. You remove your day clothes piece by piece, hang or fold them appropriately, wash your face and hands in cold water from the basin, then methodically don your sleeping costume. The familiarity of this routine allegedly signals to your body that sleep is approaching, though whether this actually works or is just Victorian wishful thinking about the power of ritual is debatable. Children are dressed for bed with similar attention to coverage and propriety. Young boys wear smaller versions of adult nightshirts. Girls wear miniature nightgowns, and both typically wear nightcaps until they're old enough to argue successfully for abandoning them. Historians still argue whether Victorian children were genuinely comfortable in all this nighttime clothing, or simply learned to tolerate it because alternatives weren't presented as options. Some people sleep in additional protective garments designed to prevent specific problems. Special nighttime corsets allegedly support the spine during sleep, though they seem more likely to prevent sleep entirely. Flannelette drawers provide extra warmth and modesty under nightshirts. Some women wear breast binders or other garments designed to maintain proper shape even during unconsciousness, as if body parts might migrate to inappropriate positions without constant regulation. The laundry implications of all this nighttime clothing are significant. Nightshirts and nightgowns should theoretically be washed weekly, but doing so requires having multiple sets, which is expensive, so actual washing happens less frequently. Your nightshirt gets washed every 2 weeks or so, meaning you sleep in increasingly soiled fabric, creating hygiene problems that the nightshirt was supposedly designed to prevent. The irony is lost on nobody. But clean nightshirts require money that most people don't have for such luxuries. As you finally climb into bed, fully costumed in your flannel armour against the night, you're aware that you look absurd. The nightshirt is bunched up around your waist already, the nightcap sits askew despite your attempts to adjust it, and the bed socks are creating enough foot warmth that you will probably kick them off within an hour. But you're properly dressed for Victorian sleep, protected by layers of fabric from cold air, immodesty, and whatever moral dangers might threaten the inadequately clothed during darkness. Whether any of this actually improves your sleep is questionable, but propriety has been maintained, and that apparently matters more than comfort. You're lying in bed trying to fall asleep when you hear Mrs. Blackwood in the hallway arguing with her husband about the window. She wants it open, believing firmly in the health benefits of fresh night air. He wants it closed, equally convinced that night air carries disease and death. This same argument happens in households across London every evening, a battle between competing medical theories that has somehow become a crucial domestic conflict. The window wars have claimed more evening peace than almost any other Victorian disagreement, and nobody can definitively prove who's correct. The fresh air movement has gained considerable momentum in recent years, with doctors and reformers insisting that sleeping in sealed rooms causes all manner of ailments. Stagnant air supposedly becomes vitiated, depleted of its life-giving properties through repeated breathing, and transforms into a poison that slowly suffocates sleepers. The solution, according to these advocates, is to sleep with windows open regardless of weather, allowing constant circulation of outdoor air to prevent the accumulation of harmful vapours. This sounds reasonable until you remember that outdoor air in London is mostly coal smoke and fog. The opposing camp argues that night air specifically, not air in general, but air during darkness, carries miasmas and disease. Opening windows after sunset invites these harmful influences into your bedroom, exposing you to fevers, chills, consumption, and various other afflictions that Victorian medicine can't quite explain, but definitely blames on improper air management. This theory has centuries of tradition behind it, plus the compelling evidence that people often feel worse after sleeping in cold rooms, which must mean something even if the reasoning's questionable. You've tried both approaches and found problems with each. Sleeping with the window closed creates a stuffy, oxygen-depleted atmosphere that leaves you waking with headaches and a mouth that tastes like you've been chewing wool. The air becomes thick with the smell of bodies, chamber pots, coal smoke from the banked fire, and general human effluvia. By morning, opening the window releases a wave of concentrated, stale air that makes you question whether humans were designed to sleep indoors at all. But sleeping with a window open during London winter is its own form of torture. The temperature drops precipitously, your breath forms visible clouds, and the cold air hits your face like punishment for believing that comfort and health might align. You pile on extra blankets and wear your nightcap tied tight, but cold air finds every gap in your bedding, creating uncomfortable drafts that wake you repeatedly. The fresh air entering your window is laced with coal smoke from thousands of neighbouring chimneys, so you're trading stale indoor air for toxic outdoor air and calling it an improvement. Some households compromise by opening windows in rooms they're not currently occupying, allowing air circulation while protecting sleepers from direct exposure. Others install elaborate ventilation systems, gratings in walls, special vents above doors that supposedly provide fresh air without the temperature drop of open windows. Whether these systems work or simply create new problems involving drafts and noise is subject to vigorous debate among people who have strong opinions about air circulation. The medical establishment publishes contradictory guidance on the window question with impressive confidence. Dr. Williams insists that sleeping in rooms with closed windows causes more deaths annually than cholera and typhoid combined, a claim that seems statistically improbable, but is delivered with such authority that people believe it. Dr. Thompson argues that night air exposure is responsible for the decline of British health and vigour, apparently forgetting that his ancestors lived in drafty medieval structures that made Victorian homes seem airtight by comparison. Margaret has developed her own window policy that she implements regardless of your preferences. She cracks the window precisely 2 inches, claiming this provides adequate ventilation without excessive cold. She's probably correct, though neither of you will admit it because that would end the ongoing debate that provides entertainment during otherwise tedious household routines. The 2-inch crack creates a whistling sound when wind blows, which is nearly always in London, producing an ambient noise that's either soothing or maddening depending on your mood. Historians still argue whether the Victorian obsession with window management reflected genuine concerns about air quality or simply provided a convenient displacement activity for anxieties about health and mortality that had no real solutions. The answer is probably both. London air was genuinely terrible, but obsessing about whether windows should be open or closed didn't address the fundamental problem of burning coal in enormous quantities without any emission controls. The fresh air fanatics take their beliefs to extremes that border on religious conviction. Some insist on sleeping on porches or in unheated rooms even during winter, believing that exposure to cold builds moral character along with physical resilience. There are stories, possibly apocryphal, of people who sleep outdoors year-round in London's climate, wrapped in blankets but directly exposed to the elements, and who apparently thrive on this masochistic routine. You suspect these stories are exaggerated or involve people with considerably more body fat than you possess. The window debate intersects with concerns about smells in ways that complicate the decision further. Your room, by morning, smells of chamber pot, unwashed bodies, stale breath, and the particular mustiness that accumulates in poorly ventilated spaces where humans sleep. Opening the window disperses these smells, which is pleasant, but also allows smells from outside to enter, primarily coal smoke, but also sewage from inadequate drainage, the Thames at low tide, various industries processing things that probably shouldn't be processed near residential areas, and the general London smell that defies description, but never quite leaves your nostrils. Some people burn incense or aromatic woods in their bedrooms, attempting to mask unpleasant smells with more pleasant ones, which simply creates complicated odour combinations that are arguably worse than the original problems. Others rely on perfumes and sachets, hanging bags of lavender or rose petals around the room in the optimistic belief that these will somehow overpower the concentrated smell of Victorian urban living. The results are mixed at best, creating bouquets of stale air, body odour and flowers that no perfumer would intentionally design. The seasonal variation in window preferences creates additional complexity. Summer heat makes closed windows unbearable. but open windows admit insects that feast on sleeping bodies with enthusiasm. You choose between being hot and bitten or hot and stuffy, both options being unpleasant in different ways. Winter makes the debate more urgent. Do you prioritize warmth or air quality? With the answer depending on how many blankets you own and how much coal you can afford to burn. Mrs. Blackwood's argument next door has apparently ended, and you hear a window slamming shut with finality, followed by another window opening with equal emphasis. They've compromised by opening the window in the hallway instead of their bedroom, which solves nothing but allows both parties to claim victory. This is probably the most common resolution to the window wars, unsatisfying compromises that maintain domestic peace while addressing nobody's actual preferences. You get up now and adjust your own window, opening it another inch because the room has become oppressively stuffy and you're willing to trade warmth for breathability. Cold air rushes in, carrying the distinctive London smell of coal smoke and urban density, and you return to bed quickly before you lose the warmth you've accumulated. The room will be uncomfortably cold within minutes, and you'll probably close the window again within an hour, and this cycle will continue all night as you oscillate between stuffy and cold, never quite finding the balance that would allow uninterrupted sleep. The truly maddening aspect is that neither extreme produces notably better sleep. Closed window nights and open window nights both result in mediocre rest interrupted by various discomforts. The window debate is ultimately revealed as irrelevant. Victorian sleep is disrupted by countless factors, and air circulation is merely one variable among many. But having something to debate, something to adjust and optimize and argue about, provides the comforting illusion of control over the fundamentally uncontrollable experience of trying to sleep in an industrial city that was never designed for human comfort. You're reading the newspaper after work when you see an advertisement for Professor Harrington's magneto-electric sleeping belt, guaranteed to cure insomnia through the application of therapeutic electrical currents to the body during sleep. The device costs £3, more than you earn in a week, and promises to revolutionize rest through the power of modern science. This is typical of the emerging industry of sleep technology, a frontier where Victorian optimism about progress meets Victorian desperation about getting decent rest, producing inventions that range from ingenious to absolutely deranged. The electric sleep devices are particularly popular among those who can afford them and believe that electricity represents the future of medicine. You strap magnets or battery-operated devices to various body parts before bed, and they supposedly deliver healthful currents that promote deep restorative sleep. Whether they actually do anything beyond creating a placebo effect and occasionally causing minor burns is questionable, but the testimonials in the advertisements are glowing. Mrs. Henderson from Cheapside claims the magneto-electric belt cured her chronic insomnia. After 3 nights, you suspect Mrs. Henderson might not be a real person. The mechanical cradles represent another approach to sleep improvement, attempting to recreate the soothing motion of infancy through engineered rocking. Some are simple suspended beds that swing gently from ceiling chains, creating motion that supposedly lulls adults to sleep just as rocking cradles soothe babies. Others are more elaborate, featuring clockwork mechanisms that maintain consistent rocking motion for hours, the steady tick-tick-tick of gears providing additional rhythmic comfort. You've tried a friend's rocking bed once and spent the entire night feeling vaguely seasick, but he swears it's transformed his sleep quality. There are sleep-inducing helmets that compress the skull in supposedly therapeutic ways, redistributing blood flow away from the overactive brain. The theory involves reducing mental activity through gentle pressure, essentially squeezing thoughts out of your head until sleep becomes possible. The helmets look like medieval torture devices and probably feel similar, but they're marketed with scientific terminology about cranial pressure and cerebral circulation that makes them sound legitimate. Historians still argue whether anyone actually used these devices regularly, or whether they existed primarily as conversation pieces for people with more money than sense. The vibrating beds are beginning to appear in some hotels and wealthy homes, powered by small motors that create gentle shaking meant to relax muscles and promote sleep. The vibrations are supposed to simulate therapeutic massage, providing constant low-level stimulation that somehow results in relaxation. In practice, they're loud, annoying, and create motion that makes reading in bed impossible. But they're modern and scientific, which apparently matters more than whether they actually work. You've heard that some hotels charge extra for rooms with vibrating beds, which seems backwards. You should be paid to tolerate them. Professor Caldwell has invented a somnambulic chamber, a sealed sleeping pod that controls temperature, humidity, and air composition with precision allegedly impossible in ordinary bedrooms. The chamber looks like a wooden coffin with ventilation tubes, which doesn't inspire confidence, but the promotional literature insists it creates perfect sleeping conditions through scientific air management. The cost is prohibitive, £50 for the basic model, and the claustrophobia-inducing design seems counterproductive. But wealthy insomniacs are apparently purchasing them based on the promise of engineered rest. There are sleeping chairs designed to support the body in semi-reclined positions that supposedly reduce pressure on the heart and lungs. Some feature adjustable components that allow customization to individual body shapes, while others follow rigid designs based on supposedly optimal sleeping angles. You've sat in one at an exhibition and found it profoundly uncomfortable, but the inventor assured you that comfort and health are different things, and his chair prioritized the latter. This seems to summarize much of Victorian sleep technology, the assumption that if something feels wrong, it's probably good for you. The sleep-inducing music boxes play endless loops of supposedly soothing melodies, their mechanisms wound to run for hours before requiring attention. Some play lullabies, others play classical compositions, and a few play sounds from nature. Bird calls, running water, wind through trees, mechanically reproduced with varying degrees of success. The constant tinkling becomes maddening after the first hour, but proponents insist that the monotony is precisely what makes them effective, providing just enough stimulation to prevent anxious thoughts while remaining too boring to maintain wakefulness. Drug delivery systems are becoming more sophisticated, with timed release mechanisms that supposedly maintain consistent opiate levels throughout the night. You can purchase small devices that slowly dissolve laudanum tablets in water, providing steady drips of medicated liquid at predetermined intervals. Whether this is better than just taking a larger dose at bedtime is debatable, but it allows users to feel they're doing something scientific rather than simply getting gradually more addicted to opiates, which is the actual result. Some inventors are experimenting with scent-based sleep aids, devices that release aromatic compounds into the bedroom air at intervals throughout the night. Lavender is popular, as is chamomile, and various proprietary blends with impressive names like Morpheus's Breath and Slumber Vapors. The devices range from simple dishes with slow-burning fragrant materials to complex contraptions with mechanical fans and timed release mechanisms. Whether smells actually promote sleep or simply mask the general unpleasantness of Victorian bedrooms is an open question. The hypnotic sleep devices employ rotating spirals, flickering lights, or swinging pendulums that supposedly induce trance states leading to sleep. You stare at the mechanism until your eyes water and your head aches, theoretically bypassing conscious resistance to sleep through direct manipulation of the subconscious mind. In practice, you mostly end up with eye strain and no closer to unconsciousness. But the devices are marketed with considerable confidence about their scientific basis in newly discovered principles of mental functioning. Weight blankets have been proposed, not the modern weighted blankets designed for comfort, but Victorian versions meant to simulate the pressure of additional sleepers in shared beds, supposedly providing psychological comfort to those sleeping alone. Some fill blankets with sand, others with lead shot, creating covers that weigh 20 or 30 pounds and make rolling over a significant physical effort. The theory suggests that pressure equals security equals sleep, though the reality seems more likely to be that pressure equals discomfort equals frustrated wakefulness. There are temperature-regulating bed systems that pipe heated or cooled water through tubes running beneath the mattress, allowing precise control of sleeping temperature. The wealthy install these elaborate systems, complete with reservoirs, pumps and control valves, transforming their beds into engineering projects that require constant maintenance. The benefits over simply adding or removing blankets are unclear, but they're scientifically advanced, which makes them inherently superior to traditional methods even when they leak and flood bedrooms with temperature-controlled water. Professor Wyatt has patented a nocturnal illumination reducer, essentially very expensive blackout curtains with elaborate mounting systems and adjustment mechanisms. The theory involves eliminating all light from sleeping spaces to promote deeper rest, which seems sensible except that Victorian bedrooms are already quite dark at night, and complete blackness means fumbling helplessly when you need to use the chamber pot. The curtains cost more than most furniture, but they're marketed as essential for modern sleep hygiene. You look again at the magneto-electric belt advertisement, seriously considering whether £3 might buy you better sleep than you currently achieve. The rational part of your mind knows it's probably nonsense, but the desperate part that woke up exhausted this morning is willing to consider almost anything. This is how the sleep technology market thrives. Not through proven effectiveness, but through the universal desperation of people who simply want to rest properly and will try increasingly absurd solutions when normal sleep remains elusive. Do you remember the last time you bought something that promised to fix your sleep? The Victorian era is discovering what future generations will rediscover constantly. That sleep is complicated, individual, and resistant to technological fixes that ignore the underlying problems of stress, environment, and the fundamental incompatibility between industrial society's demands and human biological needs. You wake one final time this particular night, and dawn is beginning its slow transformation of the darkness outside your window. The coal smoke that hangs perpetually over London catches the early light, turning everything a soft grey gold that almost makes the city beautiful. If you squint and ignore the smell, you've made it through another night of Victorian sleep. Fragmented, uncomfortable, chemically assisted, and perpetually interrupted. But you've survived, which is more than some people manage. Around you, the city is beginning its morning sounds, and you realise something has changed, though you can't quite identify what. The changes are happening gradually, too slowly for any single person to notice in their lifetime, but they're happening nonetheless. Factory whistles are becoming more standardised, synchronising the city's awakening in ways that previous generations never experienced. Gaslighting is spreading, making evening hours more productive and gradually pushing bedtime later as people discover they can extend their waking hours beyond sunset. The knocker-uppers will eventually be replaced by alarm clocks, which will themselves be replaced by technologies you can't yet imagine, each innovation claiming to improve sleep while actually just changing how people fail to sleep adequately. The segmented sleep pattern that feels so natural to you is already dying. Your younger colleagues at work sometimes boast about sleeping through, as if 8 continuous hours of unconsciousness represents progress rather than just a different way of being tired. The factories are training people to sleep in blocks that align with shift work rather than natural rhythms, and within a few generations the idea of first sleep and second sleep will seem as foreign as sleeping standing up on ropes, though both were perfectly normal for thousands of people in your city right now. The medicines you take will eventually be regulated, criminalized, or replaced with different drugs that create their own problems. Future doctors will look back on Victorian opiate use with the same horrified fascination you might feel reading about historical medical practices: bloodletting, mercury treatments, tree panning. They won't necessarily have better solutions, just different ones, with different side effects and different forms of dependency. The fundamental human desire to chemically adjust consciousness will remain constant even as the specific chemicals change. Your horsehair mattress represents a transitional technology between straw and whatever comes next. Spring mattresses, probably, then foam, then materials you can't imagine. Each generation will believe their sleeping surface represents the pinnacle of rest technology, just as you sometimes convince yourself that horsehair is superior to straw without acknowledging that it's still fundamentally uncomfortable. The bed bugs will eventually be eliminated through chemical warfare, replaced by different concerns about synthetic materials and off-gassing and allergies. The chamber pot is already on its way to obsolescence, though you don't know it yet. Indoor plumbing will transform nighttime bathroom rituals, eliminating the morning parade of embarrassment while creating new problems involving pipes and water pressure and sewage systems. You'll gain privacy and convenience while losing something ineffable, perhaps just the shared knowledge that everyone deals with the same biological necessities, that wealthy and poor alike must empty their bladders during the night. Modern plumbing will make it easier to pretend that bodies don't produce waste, which isn't really progress so much as just different forms of denial. The knocker-uppers will disappear within your lifetime, replaced by mechanical alarm clocks that don't require paying weekly wages or maintaining human relationships. You'll wake to bells instead of gentle tapping, to impersonal machinery instead of Mrs. Pettigrew's reliable presence. This will be more efficient and less expensive, which means it's inevitable, though you'll privately miss the human element even as you appreciate not having to pay for wake-up service. Progress means trading human connections for mechanical convenience over and over, each trade seeming sensible in isolation but adding up to something lonely. The window wars will eventually be resolved by central heating and air conditioning, technologies that render the debate obsolete by allowing precise temperature control regardless of window position. Future generations will wonder why Victorians argued so passionately about something so simple, not understanding that the argument was never really about windows, but about control, autonomy, and the desperate attempt to optimize an experience that resisted optimization. Every generation has its window wars, just with different specifics and the same underlying anxiety. The ghost stories that help you sleep will transform into different media: radio shows, television programs, movies, whatever technologies emerge to deliver fictional terror directly into homes. The content will change, but the impulse remains constant. Humans seem to need controlled fear, manageable horror, fictional terrors that distract from real ones, Victorian ghost stories will seem quaint to future readers, but they'll have their own horror genres that serve identical psychological functions. The elaborate nighttime clothing will gradually simplify, as central heating makes heavy flannel unnecessary, and changing social attitudes make modesty concerns less urgent. Future people will sleep in minimal clothing or nothing at all, which would scandalise you if you could know about it, though they'll probably have their own complicated anxieties about sleep that will seem equally absurd to their descendants. Every generation believes they've figured out the correct way to sleep and that previous generations were doing it wrong. The Victorian sleep experience, fragmented, chemically altered, uncomfortable, socially regulated, will eventually be viewed as historical curiosity, a relic of an era that hadn't yet mastered basic comfort. But future generations will have their own sleep problems, their own complicated rituals, their own desperate attempts to rest adequately in societies not designed for rest. They'll have better mattresses and worse stress, improved drugs and new anxieties, technological solutions that create technological problems. You lie there as dawn strengthens, feeling the familiar exhaustion that comes from Victorian sleep, but also feeling something else. A strange contentment, perhaps, or just resignation. This is your life. These interrupted nights, these chemical aids, these uncomfortable beds, these morning headaches. You're tired, perpetually tired, but you're also alive, navigating a world that's simultaneously brutal and amazing, where gaslights and knocker-uppers and opium-laced sleep aids represent the cutting edge of modernity. Margaret stirs beside you, beginning her own waking process, and soon you'll both rise to face another day of Victorian existence. The bed will remain unmade for now, its horsehair lumps and morning warmth preserved temporarily before the inevitable stripping and airing and general maintenance that beds require. The chamber pot will need emptying. The laudanum bottle will be returned to its shelf. The nightshirt will be removed and folded. The whole elaborate machinery of Victorian sleep will be packed away until evening, when it all begins again. Outside your window, London is waking, thousands of people emerging from their own versions of this night. From penny hangs and coffin beds and shared mattresses and comfortable townhouse bedrooms, all of them tired in their own ways, all of them facing the day with whatever energy they've managed to extract from inadequate rest. The knocker-uppers are finishing their rounds, the night soil men are completing their collections, the city is transforming from sleeping chaos to waking chaos, and you're part of it. One more tired person in a city of tired people doing your best to survive, to rest, to wake, to continue. The strange and uncomfortable sleep habits of Victorian London will fade into history, replaced by different strange and uncomfortable sleep habits that future generations will consider normal until they too become historical curiosities. But right now, in this moment, this is simply how sleep works. Imperfect, interrupted, inadequate, and absolutely all you have. And somehow, impossibly, it's enough. You've made it through another night, and that simple fact that you're still here, still conscious, still capable of facing whatever today brings, is its own small victory. The light grows softer now as we reach the end of our journey through Victorian nights, and perhaps you've noticed your own breathing has slowed, your thoughts drifting gently like fog over the Thames, imagining those gaslit streets growing distant, the sounds of the city fading into the comfortable darkness that surrounds you now, all those uncomfortable beds and strange rituals, the horsehair mattresses and laudanum bottles, the knocker-uppers and chamber pots. They're all settling into the past where they belong, becoming just stories, just gentle images that float through your mind without demanding attention, without needing anything from you. You're safe in your own bed, whatever century you inhabit, whatever comfort you've found, and your body knows how to rest, knows how to release the tensions of the day, knows how to slip gradually, peacefully, into the sleep that's been waiting patiently for you. The Victorians, with all their complicated sleep habits, they're resting now too. Their struggles finished, their nights complete, and you can rest alongside them, letting go of everything you've learned, letting it all dissolve into dreams, into the soft darkness, into the gentle quiet that welcomes you home. Your breathing is so calm now, so easy, and sleep is very close, perhaps already beginning, perhaps already carrying you away. And that's perfectly fine. That's exactly right, as you drift and settle, and finally, sweetly let go. End of script. Sweet dreams.